Hello and welcome. I'm Adam with Push the Envelope, the channel that gives you everything artificial intelligence and machine learning. We are going to take a break here for a second and we're going to do yet another review. Now that we covered functions, classes, and inputs and outputs, let's see if we can test our skills and actually use them for some real problems. So without further ado, let's jump over to Jupyter and we will start working through this. Alright, as always, if you have been following along, you probably know this, but for everyone else, I do have this GitHub link at the very top of your screen. It's also in the description, but this is where I'm storing all the templates, solutions, and files that we're going to be using for this review session. Now, you don't necessarily need those. You can make your own files for reading, and you can just follow along with what we're doing here in the code, but they definitely do help with some of the prompts and some of the descriptions of the problems we're working on. Let's go ahead and move on. Assuming you have all those, we are going to be looking at reviewing functions, classes, and inputs and outputs. So let's go ahead and start with functions. Now, if you remember from the functions video, and hopefully you were tuned in to that tutorial, but if not, all of them are on my YouTube channel and I will link to them so you can go check out the entire Python Bootcamp. But we want to go ahead and for this first problem, can we define a function that all it needs to do is print "thank you for shopping with us" every single time that we call the function. So see what you can do there. This one should be a fairly easy function, but go ahead, see what you can do, and then come back and we'll work through it. Okay, assuming you did that, let's go ahead and work through this. So I'm going to start by defining a function. We use the def keyword. And then we have whatever our function name is. So I'm just going to call this farewell. Not taking any inputs and outputs, so you don't need to put anything in the parentheses, but always make sure that you are ending this with a colon. And again, if you're using if statements, for loops, functions, whatever it may be, if it ends in a colon, anything that you want inside of the function needs to be indented. Okay, and then again, all we're doing is printing a message to the screen. So thank you for shopping with us. Okay, and now again, only thing we need to do to call the function is to actually just give the function name and make sure you add those parentheses in, and we can see that it is printed to the screen. If I go ahead and copy this down, you can see we can print it however many times that we want to. Okay, so that's probably the most basic function that we can make. Now let's keep expanding upon that. So taking the same sort of function, I want you to accept a person's name this time as input. And then I want you to print to the screen, "Thank you for shopping with us," but I want you to include whoever the customer's name was. So in this format right here, see what you can do. Remember, inputs go inside of the parentheses, but try that out and then come back. Okay. Let's go ahead, again, define our function. I'm going to keep it the same, so I'm going to call it farewell. Now, this was the standard notation we used before, but now that we have inputs, we need to pass in this case, the person's name. Now, this variable can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't need to be name. You can call it string. You can call it X. It doesn't really matter. It's just whatever you're temporarily storing the name as. Okay. And again, all we're doing is printing to the screen, "Thank you for shopping with us," followed by a comma. I'm just going to do string math here, and I'm just going to add the name to the very end of it. And it looks like I also need an exclamation mark if I want to be exactly the same as what I'm printing out. Now, again, all I need to do is call the function. But in this case, I do need to pass the shopper's name. So if I use Adam in this case, I print it out, it will print my name. Now if I copy this a few times and change up the name, maybe we got a Deshaun in here, and we have a, I don't know, Louisa. Printing all those out, you can see that we have each statement printing out unique to that person that we're calling it. Okay. Last thing for functions, again, expanding upon that, is the outputs. So I want you to create a function, it accepts a number of items, a price for each item, and a name. And then I want you to, again, print out that farewell statement. Thank you for shopping with us with the name, but I want you to return the total. And the total is going to be calculated by the number of items you bought times the price of each of those items. So see what you can do. Again, the return keyword is what you're going to be using here for outputs. Just keep that in mind and come on back when you're done and we will work through it. All right. Again, defining a function, let's just keep it the same. Just make it easy throughout all this. Now, we're accepting more than one input here. So we have the number of items. So I'm just going to call that items. Now, when you have more than one input, separate those by commas. Price for each item, I'm just going to call that price. And then the person's name. So again, name is being stored in there. Okay. Your choice of whether you want to print first or calculate the total. I'm just going to calculate the total first. So I'm going to save it as total. And total is equal to items times price. I am then going to print the farewell statement. So thank you for shopping with us. And then followed by the person's name. I need to make sure my quotation marks are the same here. And followed by an exclamation mark. Okay, so that takes care of the farewell statement. Now the last thing I need to do is return the total to main. Again, that's that return keyword to pass back the total. So now when I call the function farewell, again, this was the original way we called it. We have to add some inputs. So now we have to have some items. So maybe I bought 5 items at $6.77. And my name is Adam. Now, since we're using a return, we either need to save this as a variable or immediately print it to the screen. I will just save it as a new variable. I'm going to call it total again. It does not need to be the same as what's in the function. Remember, anytime you declare a variable within the function, it's only temporary, so it only lives within the function. So you can change it outside of it. But after that, I'm just going to print the total. So running this, you can see, thank you for shopping with us, Adam. Here's my total. Now, again, we can do rounding. So maybe if right before I return it, maybe I want to round it. So round the total to 2 decimal places. You can see that's back to the dollar amount. And again, if I want to copy this, maybe we bought 9 items for $33.87. And in this case, it was Louisa Bottom. You can see here's the updated total, the updated farewell message. All right, perfect. So that's going to cover everything for functions. Now let's move on to classes. So I want you to define a class, and all it's going to do is have 2 variables. One for the base name, which is going to be equal to this value right here, GFAFB, and the location, which would be Grand Forks, North Dakota. So again, go ahead, define that class. Now for this, very basic, so you don't even need to use the initialization function. You can complete it with the initialization function if you want to, but it's really unnecessary. So see what you can do, come back, we'll work through it. All right, I'm going to define a class. Remember, the keyword for class is just class. Python's very easy. It's almost like written language. You tell it exactly what you want it to do. Now you need to come up with a name for your class. I'm just going to call this base with a capital B. And make sure you put those parentheses followed by a colon. Remember that indent, and we're moving on. So if you want to just define a variable within a class that doesn't have to change or doesn't accept any inputs from the user, you can just straight up define it. So I'm going to have one called base name, and that's going to be equal to GFAFB. And then I'm going to have one called location, and that is going to be equal to Grand Forks, North Dakota. Okay, that takes care of everything we need to do to define the class. Now if we want to actually use the class, we're going to say, I'm just going to call it GFAFB is equal to base. And remember to include those parentheses. Since we do not have an initialization function that accepts parameters, we don't need to include anything within the parentheses. But if I wanted to, I can print GFAFB dot base name, and same thing, dot location, and this will give us those two parameters, as we can see right here. If I wanted to, I could put these on separate lines so it's a little easier to see, but you can see both of those are printing out. Okay, that's about as basic of a thing you can do with a class. Now let's move on, a little more complex. Let's start using the initialization function. So I want you to define a class that initializes with a person's first name, last name, and rank, and then stores it as 3 separate variables. So not like we did up here where we're just hard coding those in. Actually allow inputs from the user when they initialize the class. See what you can do. Remember, the keyword for this is init underscore underscore init underscore underscore. That's the name of the initialization function. Hopefully you remember that, but go ahead, do that, come on back, and we will work through it. Okay, I'm going to make a new class, again, keyword class. I'm going to call this one Airman. Remember those parentheses and followed by a colon. Now, again, we're using the initialization function. So we're going to define the initialization function. When you use functions, the keyword is def. The initialization function, again, is underscore underscore init underscore underscore. Okay, always pass in self to init because we're going to be assigning those variables using self. So assigning the class variables. Now, it accepts the person's first name, last name, and rank. So pass in first name, last name, rank. Those can be whatever you want them to be. They're just variables that are temporarily storing those values. Okay, now in order to assign variables to the class inside of a function, we need to use that keyword self. So self is just going to reference the class itself, and then you're going to give it the variable name. So self.first will be the first, the variable named first within the class. So first is going to be equal to first name, self.last is going to be equal to last name, and self.rank is going to be equal to rank. Now, coming down here and actually using this, let's say this first person is Airman 1, and it's going to be equal to big A Airman. Okay, this is how we've defined it before, but since we're using the initialization function, is looking for 3 parameters to initialize the class. So let's go with Tom, White, and let's say the rank is Major. This is going to initialize Airman 1 to be all of these parameters. It's going to save it within the class. So now when I print the class, dot first will grab the first name. Dot last will grab the last name. And actually, I'm going to put this in order, so I'm going to start with the rank. Okay, so printing out the rank, first name, and last name to the screen will give us all of that in order. Again, if I wanted to, I could define a new one, and maybe this person is Betty White, but she is going to be a captain. Printing that out. Again, you can see that will print to the screen. Okay, last thing for classes. Again, moving up a little bit with what you can actually do. Not only can you store variables, you can store functions within classes. So I want you to make a function that prints out all of the information once it's stored. So use what we just did in the last section. You can even copy it if you want to. So go ahead and copy that down. We have all of this information. I want you to create a function that will print all of the information for you instead of printing it out one by one like we did before. So see what you can do there. Remember, keyword for function is def, whatever the function name is, and always pass in self if you're trying to reference the class variables. See what you can do. Come on back and we will work it. Okay. In this case, we're going to define the function right under the init function. So define a new function. We're going to call it something. I'm going to call it print name. Okay, remember to pass in self to this function and always end in a colon. Okay, everything in here that we're printing out is what we did in the last section. So we are going to be printing self dot rank, self dot first, and self dot last, and this will print the complete person's name. So now if we go up here and we grab our 2 airmen again, and I'm actually just going to change the second airman so it's not overriding, and we're going to actually just get rid of those print statements, so I didn't actually need to change those. Okay, so we have our 2 airmen here. Now I want to say airman1 dot, and remember the function that we just made is called print name. So we're going to call dot print name. Remember to include those parentheses. Since we're not passing anything into the function, we don't need to pass anything in here. Self is already included with the class. But we're going to copy that, and we are going to bump that down here to airman 2. And you can see both of those are printing out the way we wanted it to. Now, if we had some other thing that we wanted to print out, maybe we have some sort of greeting. Okay, so now our function is going to take this greeting. We're going to print greeting followed by rank first last. Now when we call this function, we do need to pass something in, and that's going to be this greeting. So if I want to print hello, and same thing down here, I just need to pass in hello to the function now. And as you can see, that variable is being stored as greeting and printed out as this whole line right here. So ways of passing in variables along with using the class variables themselves. All right, that's enough on classes. Let's move to our last topic, and that is inputs and outputs. So this is going to be 3 parts: getting inputs from the user, reading and writing files. So first part, getting user inputs. So I want you to request a random number from the user, and then I want you to determine whether or not the number is even or odd. Now, I think we covered this in one of our previous videos. This is sort of a common thing to figure out if your number is even or odd or divisible by some number. But remember the, in this case, the modulus operator, and that is going to be the percent sign. So, for instance, 3 mod 2, if I go ahead and print this to the screen, it's going to give me 1 because the answer to this is actually 1 and 1/2. Modulo will grab the numerator. So it's going to grab this 1. That's why we return the 1 here. So taking that, try to figure out how you may use that to figure out if the number is even or odd. And then again, print to the screen whether or not the number is even or odd. See what you can do. Remember, this is super important that when you get inputs from the user, they're going to be stored as strings. So you may need to convert those to numbers in order to do this. But go ahead, take some time, try this, and then come on back. Okay. Assuming you did that, we will go ahead and move on. To get inputs from the user through the command line, we use the keyword or the function input. Very easy. We're going to save that as number. So number equals input. Enter a random number. Okay. I'm just going to run this to show you what it does, but as you can see, here is our prompt for the user, followed by our empty box that we can put some value into. Once they hit enter, it will be stored as number. Now, like I said, number is going to be stored if we go ahead and print the type of number, and I put in some random numbers here. Again, it's going to be stored as a string. So very first thing we need to do is we need to convert number to be an integer. And we're going to use the keyword int to do that. And that's going to take that string and convert it to a whole number, which you can see integer right there. Okay. Now, once we have that integer, we need to figure out if it's even or odd. So we need to say if number. Now, since we're figuring out if it's even or odd, if it's divisible by 2, then it's obviously even. If it's not, then it's obviously odd. So if we use modulo 2, when it's even, the numerator should be 0 because there should not be a remainder. So When number mod 2 is equal to 0, then we are going to print even. If there is a remainder, then else we're going to print odd. Going ahead and moving on, we are going to put in some random number. This is an odd number. It does print out odd to the screen. If I were to run this again, making sure I use an even number, you can see it's printed out to even. If I do one last one, I do 0, it's going to print as even as well. If you wanted to change that and say if it's 0, then don't print even or odd, you could do that. But for now, this is as far as it will go. So that is getting inputs from the user again. Biggest thing is if you're trying to get a number from the user, it's going to save it as a string to begin with, and you need to convert it. Okay, so moving on, reading files. So I do have this file in the background called scores.txt, and as you can see, each line in here has a score of a game. So the left is what the team scored, and the right is what the opponent scored, and obviously it's separated by 2. So for this, what we're going to do is read this line by line and pull out whether or not team 1 won or team 2 won. So whether or not the team on the left won or the team on the right won. So see what you can do there. Remember how to read files. Remember that there are hidden characters within the line. You're going to have end characters that you're going to need to remove. So if you need to, you can go back and reference the solution for the inputs and outputs section. But take a stab at it, come on back, and I will show you how we can actually do this. Okay. The standard way of reading files, again, is with open, and then whatever your file name is. In this case, I don't have it in another folder, I just have it in the same folder we're in right now, so I'm just going to read scores.txt, and I can close that, and I'm just going to call this F for file. Now I'm going to read line by line, so for line in f.readLines, this is going to go line by line through it, and then we're going to do something with it. So if I print line, just to see, you can obviously tell that we have all the files written in, but we do have this end character, and that's because there's a hidden special character in here. So if you print REPR of the line, you can see we have this hidden special character in this \n. So that's the first thing we're going to need to remove. So if we take line is equal to line dot replace, we're going to take that special character and we're going to replace it with nothing. This is going to completely remove it from the line. Running that again, you can see those special characters are no longer there. Now we have our left team and we have our right team, and it's separated by space to space. So we need to split the line in order to get team 1 and team 2 scores. So team 1, team 2, we're going to save those as two separate variables, but we're going to say line.split space to space. That's going to, again, grab the left, grab the right, and give us those values. If we go ahead and print team 1, team 2, you can see now we do have those numbers here. But the thing is, if I print the type of each of these and the type of team 2, you can see these are not actually numbers. They're actually just saved as strings. So we do need to convert these in the next step. In order to do that, we're going to say team 1 equals the integer, of team 1. And team 2 is equal to the integer of team 2. Okay. Printing those out, now they are integers. I'm going to go back to just printing out what the scores were. Okay. And you can see we have all of our scores. Now, we want to say 3 different conditions here. I want to know whether or not team 1 won, team 2 won, or they tied. So, if team 1 is greater than team 2, that obviously means team 1 won the game. So I can print team 1 I can print the string team1 1. We're going to use an elif. Elif team2 is greater than team1. We're going to print out team2 1. Finally, we're going to have an else, and this else is going to cover everything else, which will be a tie. So teams 1 and 2 tied. I'm going to remove this final count here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to move this print statement. Just so we can make sure that it's working correctly, I'm going to put it above our if statement. So now what we're doing is printing out the score and whether or not team 1 won. And team 1 did win in this case because 96 is greater than 91. Moving on, let's figure out one where they tied. 67 and 67 is a tie. And team 2 won here where 92 is greater than 80. So it is working. But kind of putting it all together with our reading files and then manipulating the string. Okay. I want you to go ahead and I want you to read in those same scores, but I want you to save the scores into a new file. And so let's go ahead and in this case, save the scores separated by a comma. So save team 1, comma, team 2, and then write that to a file. And you can go ahead and basically copy what we did up here. I'm going to copy everything right before the if statement. But add in that file right now. When you're using open for your new file, you can name it whatever you want, but you need to make sure that you're using the keyword W. You're passing in that W character because we want to have that file open as a writable file. Again, reference the solutions if you need to from that section, but take a stab at it, come on back, and we will work this last problem and close it out. All right, so I'm going to open my writable file at the same time. So I'm going to say with open, I'm going to call this one diffs.txt. Need to save it as a different keyword because F is already used, so I'm going to say W for write. Make sure everything under it is indented properly, so you probably need to shift this over. Now, what we're doing here is we're reading in team 1, team 2. I actually don't even need to convert these to integers because we need to write those as strings anyways. But what we need to do is a w dot, so this is the writable file. So the writable file dot write. And I just realized I didn't follow my own advice. When you're opening the file that you're writing to, make sure to pass that W character in to tell it that we're about to write to it. It needs to be a writable file. Okay, now that that's taken care of, come back down here to w.write. So we're going to be passing in team 1. We're going to have a comma separating these. I'm just going to do a comma space to make it a little easier and more readable. And we're going to pass in team 2. Now, if you remember from that tutorial, in order to get these on separate lines, the last character you need to pass it is the first character we removed. So that is the \n because that tells it, put this on a new line. That's the new line character. All right, running this, we should be able to write a new file. If I open up our diffs.txt, you can see all of those were saved and we are good to go. So I hope you got something out of this. Again, a lot of this, now that we've gone through the first 6 tutorials, it's again all about repetition. Constantly using these for new problems. You've basically learned everything up until this point, and it's about 95% Python. It's just how do we use all of these fundamental things to do whatever you're trying to do. The next video, we're going to be looking at a capstone project. So we're going to be, again, taking all of this, putting it into some end-to-end example, some real-world example that we can actually use to solve a problem. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for joining me on this video, and I will see you next time.